Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about everything I read in August. I mostly read horror this month and there were some really good ones in there and then a couple of not so good ones. But overall I had a pretty decent month, and first up I read The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. This is a fairly battered copy, but it does have this rather dashing picture of the author on the back here, just hanging out with a cup of coffee. Anyway, this was originally published in 1971 and it is the story of a young girl who is believed to be possessed by a demon, and there is an exorcist that comes in to try and save her. And it's a very famous book, a very famous film. I read this as a buddy read with the lovely Emily at Page Turns. I will leave a link to her channel down below. She's awesome. Go check her out. And we both really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I think she gave it 4 stars as well. It might be a 4.5 star for me, I'm not quite sure, somewhere between 4 and 4.5, but it was excellent. I did have a couple of issues with it. I found some of the pacing was a bit hit and miss. There are certain sections when it does get quite dry in that we're going through all of the kind of medical options or reasons that might be why Regan is experiencing what she is experiencing, and that I did find got a bit kind of lengthy and drawn out at times. Another thing was I had some difficulty connecting with the main character Chris, who is the mother of the young girl Regan, and she is an actress, she's really wealthy, she, you know, has a whole team of people working for her and, you know, taking care of her house, making her meals, taking care of her daughter, while she, you know, gets to complain about a crappy script. And that seems to be her biggest worry in life. And I can't relate to that. So I did have a bit of a hard time kind of sympathising with her at the beginning. But as the story develops, I did find myself maybe still not relating to her, but I could connect with her and I could sympathise with her. So maybe I had to go through that initial disconnect in order to make that sympathy more impactful. One of my favourite things in the book was the relationship between Father Karras and Detective Kinderman. They kind of come together and they have a bit of a rapport, and I just really enjoyed it. And I know Emily and I talked about it and we discussed how much we would love a Karras and Kinderman spin-off. Yeah, I would be all over that. I think that would be amazing, but alas. This was, yeah, an excellent read. I actually sobbed like a baby at the end of this book, which I did not see coming. I have already seen the film, so I knew how it ended up, but I didn't expect it to have such an effect on me. And it's not like I have any kind of direct experience similar to what happens here, but there's just something that kind of really hit me quite hard. And I was just like crying a lot, and I had to like hold off sending a message to Emily about it because I was just pretty much distraught. And then when I finally left her a message, it just all came back and I was like struggling to get the words out. So yeah, that was a thing. So yeah, this was great. It's, yeah, well deserved of the hype that continues to surround it all of these years later. I found it compelling, creepy and emotional, so yeah, a solid 4, maybe a 4.5. Next up, something completely different. I read The Lifeguard by Richie Tankersley Cusick. This is one of the point horror book series, one that I had back in the 90s but haven't read since. This is about Kelsey. Her mum is dating a guy who lives on an island, and he has 2 sons and a daughter. So Kelsey and her mum are going to visit them for the summer, and when they arrive they find out that the daughter of this family has gone missing. So Kelsey becomes involved in this situation as everyone is trying to figure out what happened. There is also talk of some mysterious drownings that have happened despite there being lifeguards, and the story goes from there. This was actually really good. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would reading it as an adult. It's actually really well written. I really enjoyed her writing, and it was actually a pretty compelling read. Yes, it's definitely a bit cheesy and nothing too like groundbreaking, but it was a good read. This one definitely kept me guessing, and I pretty much accused every single character on being the killer, and the ending was still somewhat surprising, and yeah, it was just an interesting book. There's also a couple of chapters from the POV of the killer, which I thought was really interesting, especially, you know, for what is technically a kid's book. That's kind of dark, but it was a good read. I read this as a buddy read with Beckie Bookworm. I will leave her channel linked down below, and yeah, she enjoyed it too, so we were both, I guess, point horror fans back in the day, so yeah, it was nice to revisit it, and yeah, we both enjoyed it. I gave this one 3 stars, but I guess in like the point horror world this would definitely be a 4-star at least, so yeah, it was good fun. Next up I read Prey by Graham Masterton. This is a horror novel set on the Isle of Wight, off the coast of England, and it's about David, who is recently separated from his wife, and he has taken his young son to a place called 40-Foot House on the Isle of Wight. He has taken up a job there to renovate the property for sale because the current owners are selling it. They have already left and are desperate to put it on the market. The book starts off with a quote from a Lovecraft story, and it definitely goes into some Lovecraftian territory. There are some bizarre characters, there are some crazy situations, it does get quite bonkers. It starts off kind of quiet, and the first chapter itself was really creepy. He basically starts to hear these noises in the attic and he goes to investigate, and I just thought, yeah, that chapter was really well done, and it kind of set the tone really early on. But the tone definitely shifts the more you get into the book. It goes from creepy to just outright bonkers, and I really quite enjoyed it. It's hard to say too much about it without giving plot points away, but there is definitely a sense of unease, and there are a lot of kind of creepy things going on that are unexplained, and you're following David as at first he just dismisses them, but then realises something must be amiss, and then he speaks to some of the locals and finds out more about the local history and exactly what is going on in 40-Foot House. Overall, I really liked his writing. There are some really creepy scenes, there's some really good gory scenes. Aside from a couple of kind of cringy sex scenes and some quite lengthy info dumps towards the end, this was a really good read, and yeah, I was kind of just happy to go along for the ride, and it definitely is a bit of a ride. So yeah, I enjoyed this one a lot and I gave it 4 stars. Next up I read Bad Man by Dathan Auerbach, or I tried to read it. I ended up not finishing this one. I just couldn't get along with it, unfortunately. But this was very kindly sent to me by Doubleday Books, so thank you to them for sending it my way. Yeah, unfortunately it just wasn't for me. This is about Eric. 5 years ago, he and his little brother were shopping in their local supermarket, and his little brother went missing, and the rest of the story is told in the present day, while Eric is still dealing with the repercussions of this and trying to figure out exactly what happened. He ends up getting a job at the very same supermarket and tries to investigate further. This was a really interesting premise and I was really looking forward to reading it. I had also heard really good things about his previous book, Pen Pal. I haven't read that yet, and I would still be interested in checking that out even though Badman wasn't for me. But unfortunately I just found the story very slow. It seemed really drawn out. There was a lot of focus on his interactions with a few other people at the supermarket, and it didn't really seem to add much plot-wise. You know, we were fed kind of tiny bits of information or things that might be kind of intriguing. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to keep my attention. And the other negative for me was that I just was not connecting with any of the characters, especially Eric. So I had a hard time continuing with the story because I just wasn't connecting with any of it. So that was a real shame. I gave it just over a third and I figured that was a good enough chance to hook me in, and it just didn't do so. So the section that I did read, I only gave 2 stars to, and I have heard quite mixed things about this book overall, so it may or may not be one that piques your interest. Next up, I picked up Beast by Peter Benchley, and unfortunately this was another one that I didn't finish. I gave it like a third and I just wasn't feeling it, so I put it down. This is by the author of Jaws, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to wear my Jaws t-shirt. And I think the problem with it is that even though I've never read Jaws, I've seen the film many times, and Beast just felt like it was the same story, just with a giant squid instead of a great white shark. And I was expecting something fun and entertaining, and it just fell a bit flat for me. The problem was that it just felt formulaic and therefore predictable, and maybe this goes to some places that I am not expecting. If you've read it and you think I should give it another go, let me know. But the fact that I just felt like I could see exactly what was going to happen, it didn't make me want to keep reading it. Another thing I didn't really like was the sexism. Even though this was published in the 90s, the sexism was still pretty high. The female characters are pretty much just there to be objectified, and all of the other characters in there were men, so every time we were introduced to a new character that actually had some kind of substance, it was a man, even though a lot of them could have been women characters. I got to the end of part 1, which is about a third of the way through, and we're introduced to a new character who is a journalist, who is a man, and then I kind of started part 2 thinking, am I going to continue with this or not? And we're introduced to a new character who's a doctor, who is a man, and I was just kind of over it at that point. And I definitely don't mean that things have to be forced and that, you know, there have to be women characters shoehorned in there. It has to be natural and it has to be authentic, but there were just a few things in here that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and so after a while I just wasn't feeling it. And add to that the kind of predictability, I didn't think I was going to really get anything out of continuing to read it, so I decided to put it down. And again, the portion that I did read, I gave 2 stars. I mean, it was okay, and I feel like it would have been an okay read had I continued, but I just had so many other books that I really want to get to that I felt like I was wasting my time on this one. Next up, things did pick up again, thankfully. I read The Influence by Ramsey Campbell. This is about a family with a very overbearing aunt who is known as Queenie. And Queenie is still living in the family home. She is kind of sequestered in an upstairs bedroom, which she never leaves. She is getting quite old, and her niece Alison, her husband and their daughter are all living in the same house with Queenie. Alison and her sister Hermione have had a difficult relationship with their aunt Queenie over the years, especially Hermione, and they suspect her of having some strange powers, possibly. Early on in the book, Queenie passes away, so the family are all dealing with that, and they still kind of feel like Queenie hasn't really left them. And Hermione actually believes that Queenie's spirit is trying to take over the body of Rowan, Alison's daughter. Sorry, there are quite a few names. It definitely took me a little bit of time to get on board with all of the different characters. There are definitely many more in the book, but once I got on board with it, it was totally fine. I really liked this. This was actually the first Ramsey Campbell I've read. I really liked his writing. I don't know if it would be for everyone, but I liked it a lot. And the story itself it's kind of like a family drama around a kind of supernatural situation. Queenie and the house itself definitely feel like big presences still with the family. And there are some creepy and chilling moments for sure. It also does get quite sad and heartbreaking, and yeah, I really enjoyed the kind of family drama aspect to it. You know, mixed in with the creepy goings on are, you know, just the mundane everyday life stuff, and I enjoyed the mixture of that and how it all was put together. Again, hard to say too much about it without giving things away, but I liked this one a lot and I gave it 4 stars. And last up, I read My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I listened to the audio version of this, which was narrated by Emily Wu Zeller, and I really enjoyed this. I read Horror Store by Grady Hendrix last month, and I know he has a new novel coming out this month called We Sold Our Souls, which I'm really looking forward to, so I just wanted to get this one in before I read his new one, and I'm really glad I did. This is about Abby and Gretchen, who become friends at quite a young age and are then friends as they get older and move to high school. It's set in the 80s, so there's a lot of 80s references and nostalgia, which I really enjoyed. As they move on to high school though and get a bit older, Gretchen starts to change and she seemingly becomes a different person, and Abby believes that she has been possessed by a demon, and she tries and tries to get through to Gretchen, and eventually the last thing she can think to do is to bring in an exorcist. This was such a great read, thoroughly enjoyable. I cried, and I don't mean just at the emotional climax, I cried about 5 times throughout this book, completely unexpectedly. I did not realise it was going to be as emotional as it was. But even like one of the early chapters when, God, I'm like welling up already, like what is wrong with me? But even one of the early chapters when Abby and Gretchen become friends, I just thought was really touching, and I thought the way that Grady spoke about being a 10-year-old girl was very spot on. It definitely hit me in the feels, and I guess it's that age when you're starting to become aware of certain pressures, and you know, being cool and being popular, 2 things I never was. But yeah, I just thought it was really well done, and the story isn't just emotional with that kind of friendship aspect. It definitely goes to some dark places, don't get me wrong. There are some pretty gross and gory scenes in here which I thought were excellent, and I love how he can just throw those out at you when you're least expecting it. I thought it did have some similar themes to Horror Store. There were some of the elements of kind of finding yourself and who you are, and also, you know, how you connect with other people. In Horror Store, I guess it was more about teamwork, and in My Best Friend's Exorcism it was about friendship, but I really liked how there were some similar themes going on. So this was a really fun read. I enjoyed the 80s nostalgia, I enjoyed the friendship aspect and all of the emotions that came with that, and I also really enjoyed the horror aspects of it and some of the more gory scenes. So yeah, this kind of had a bit of everything, but it really worked very well, and I gave it 4 stars. So that was everything I read in August. Let me know if you've read any of these, let me know what you thought, or let me know if you've been reading anything good recently. Thank you ever so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!